right, so we're gonna we have a little webinar slideshow that will kind of guide us, although we won't be in that entirely. We'll just kind of go through this, and I want to encourage both of you too. If you have any questions as we're going through with that, I think Dr. Turpin and I don't mind at all if you interrupt and chime in, right, and ask a question. So
the session is totally for you too. So whatever you want to know,
yeah,
what you want to talk about.
Cool. All right, so I will start by sharing my screen. We'll kind of make this official. All right. Everybody see our little presentation here? Fantastic. So welcome everybody to the Iliff School of Theology Master of Divinity info session. We're very excited and delighted you're able to join us today. And we hope that you learn a lot and have a good time and ask all the questions that you need to, and we will do our best to answer them. We're going to go ahead and begin with a round of introductions, but we're going to start that introduction with the faculty director of the MDiv program at Iliff, Dr. Catherine Turpin. Catherine, take it away.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Let's see. So I have been at Iliff for 2 decades. This is my 21st academic year, so a long time. And my areas of research and writing and all of that and teaching are in religious education and practical theology. Some people like to think of both of those as oxymorons, which I find amusing. But basically, I'm interested in how people come to be who they are in faith and you know, how they move about in the world out of those commitments, things like that. So yeah, I'm from, well, kind of from the South. I went to college and seminary in Birmingham and in Atlanta. So moving out to Denver was a cultural experience for me because it's quite a different world out here religiously, certainly, not in other ways. Yeah, I think that's me. Well, and I also, so I have, I direct this degree program, the MDiv, and I'm also an associate dean for curriculum and assessment. So I do a lot of the behind the scenes work for accreditation and things like that.
Thank you. And I'm Brother Daniel Claywater, the admissions representative for the MDiv and Doctor of Ministry degree programs, specifically at Iliff, although I know about all of them. Been doing this job, it's going to come on 8 years now. I'm also an MDiv graduate, though, of Iliff. So I graduated in 2002 with my Master of Divinity with a social justice and ethics concentration. And then after graduating, spent about a little bit over a dozen years kind of in the nonprofit world. I was ordained a deacon in the United Methodist Church, and my ministry was with a nonprofit specifically focused around sort of labor and worker justice issues, as well as like immigrant rights. So that was a great little gig. I was able to kind of organize clergy from all different faith traditions, right? Jewish, mainline Christian. We had a Zen Buddhist priest and a Sufi for a while too. And yeah, one of my jobs was kind of like, if they wanted to get arrested for a good cause at a protest, I helped make that happen for them. So, and at that time, particularly 2002, there weren't many other schools like Iliff that actually had a curriculum within the MDiv that would allow somebody to be proficient in that kind of work. And then just as an aside, I guess the BR dot, the brother in front of my name, I'm a 20+ year member of the Order of St. Luke, which is sort of a dispersed ecumenical religious community order that was founded in the old Methodist Church back in the 40s. And so kind of rooted in the monastic tradition, although, you know, it's lay, clergy, married, non-married, whatever. So we don't like to live in a monastery, but we're primarily devoted to liturgical and sacramental education, scholarship, and practice. So I help edit one of their journals too. Yeah, I think that's all for me. I guess the only other thing of note there is, you know, please notice how I'm clasping my hands in my picture in a not at all awkward way.
Daniel, you remind me that I did not talk about my religious tradition either.
Please, go ahead.
Which is just, I'm a layperson in Methodist Church, have been my whole life, you know, often standing in strong contrast to some of the policies of that church, but have been in places that have been fully welcoming. So I've been able to stay in that tradition thus far. We'll see how that goes as things keep shifting around, but.
Church, yeah. Yeah, and I guess yeah, and I'd add too. I did. Became was received into the Episcopal Church about 3 years ago myself. So just kind of made a little jump, but not too far really. Very similar heritage, Methodist Episcopalians. All right. And we're going to go ahead and do. We'd love to hear from you both as well, I guess. So we know your name, but if you could just reiterate your name, any preferred pronouns if you have those, your current geographic location, right, that you're zooming in from, and your faith and spiritual tradition, if that's applicable. So whoever wants to go first is fine.
Hi, I'm Jackie Delafosse. I'm currently in Evergreen, Colorado, in the mountains here, and we enjoy living here in this space, my wife and I. And the faith tradition I come from, I grew up missionary Baptist, but have evolved through the years with United Church of Christ, and currently, in the last 5 years, we're part of the Episcopal faith.
All right, I am JP, pronouns he, him, currently in Mequon, Wisconsin, which is a suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's where I grew up. I've been on the West Coast the last 6 years, however. I went to CU for 2 years in my undergrad, CU Boulder, so I'm relatively familiar with the Denver region. Current tradition, I spent the last 5 years working at 2 different Buddhist meditation centers. And I don't identify as anything, just out of the desire to not be limited. I'm very interested in specifically the other tradition. I've spent a lot of time studying Theravada Buddhism, Thai Forest Buddhism, which comes from Thailand, and Sri Lankan Buddhism and Burmese Buddhism. So that's certainly where I am most deeply rooted. However, I'm very, very fascinated by Christianity. I grew up Presbyterian. I loved growing up Presbyterian. And currently, or the last few years, what I've really been studying is people like Catherine Keller or John D. Caputo, who are kind of exploring Christianity from this very creatively hermeneutic lens that allows for so much, I don't know, just there's so much juiciness and delight and beauty in the unpacking of different Christian values and tenets and paradigms and metaphors or ideas. That just really inspire me and touch me deeply. So I know Iliff definitely leans Christian pretty heavily, but I know it's also quite interreligious and ecumenical, and that definitely interests me. So kind of a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh no, that's great. Thank you both. Yeah, for sharing that. Yeah, and we'll get into in the next slide. Actually, we'll be addressing a lot of the things you both raised. I might take actually a quick second though too, and it occurs to me it might be helpful for Dr. Turpin and I to also know if you're able to speak to this sort of what's attracted you initially to the MDiv, right? Like in terms of future vocation or practice, right? Whatever that is. So again, whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I've been in care with St. Lawrence Episcopal Church and started my discernment process right before COVID. So it was a very interesting process because we did a lot by Zoom. I was one of the first candidates to do our training for the discernment committee on Zoom and to do a lot of that process in Zoom. So what attracts me is that I am in the process in November. So we were supposed to have our bishops' conference on ministry in May, but that got canceled because of COVID. So now it's coming up in November. What attracts me to the MDiv program, besides wanting to work in the ministry of being a priest or being a minister in some fashion, in some way. And I am a retired educator, so I was a teacher, school administrator for 30 plus years. And so I'm coming full circle to my call.
That is great. Thank you for your service, Jackie, in the school administration.
I
That is
know.
that's serious business, and it's not sometimes can be a thankless job these days. So
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
great. Thanks for
Thank you.
sharing.
So I'm not sure if my intention is unusual or if it's common or not. I'm interested in the MDiv. I started becoming interested in it about almost 2 years ago. The seed was planted and I started doing a lot of research. My desired outcome, my desired vocation is to be a private practice therapist. However, I intend and try to now live a semi-monastic life. I'm very, very religiously focused and oriented, and it's kind of my entire life is really oriented around living, performing, enacting religious truths and values and ideas as you know, as much as possible. And although therapy, because it's a reliable source of income and a way of, you know, healing people quite tangibly, supporting others in their mental health, although that's the kind of direct outcome I'm looking for, at the same time, I really want to co-create, co-facilitate spaces of religious and philosophical inquiry, and learn how to do that in a ministerial way, learning how to tend those spaces, how to be in those spaces of religious fellowship and ask questions and have groups, you know, group exchanges and interactions and learning chants and hymns and prayers and doing all this together. And I'd be more interested in doing that on kind of like a volunteer basis and having that be an important part of my life, but not be my career, so to speak, more of like my spiritual vocation, and then have my career be private practice therapy. But in the private practice therapy, I'm also interested in kind of allowing it to be something akin to spiritual mentorship as well for people who are inclined towards that, who think or want their mental health to be integrated with their spiritual life. And you can't get that really. I've looked at a lot of masters in counseling programs and almost zero of them are spiritually or religiously focused, unless you go to the private schools, which are like 80 grand a year, like CIIS or Pacifica or all these places, or Naropa. So yeah, that's my interest. I have a lot of enthusiasm, but I know it's not probably very typical.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. Actually, a lot of the stuff you said is kind of typical in a lot of ways of the different kinds of students we have. And all, since you kind of mentioned therapy too, I can't remember if we have this in our presentation, but I'll just mention it off the front end, is that we often do get folks who are coming from a counseling or social work background who are coming to Iliff precisely because of kind of what you mentioned, right? Like they've realized that the quote unquote client base they work with often are people of faith, of some sort of faith, and they were not trained to engage in that, right, as part of the therapy. So, and then I'll also say before we kind of start to jump into the meat of the presentation today that you can do any of the master's programs at Iliff cooperatively with a master's of social work from the University of Denver. That's a serious ambition. I don't think it's easy, but we don't have a lot of students do it, but we do. And one of them, at least now, I know is in it right now. And for some folks, that can lead to all kinds of licensure things that you might not get with just a master's theology degree by itself. So yeah, you're not weird at all. So, all right, let's jump into a little framing, right, of who Iliff is. Depending how much time both of you have spent sort of either chatting with me or stalking us on the website, you may already know this. But I think, you know, ATS accredited seminaries in North America, we all do many things the same, particularly within the MDiv. A lot of requirements like internships, right, are very common. But every school has its own history, right, and background, and the faculty play a huge role in that, right, in their background. And so it kind of gives each institution a little bit different flavor. So Iliff was founded in 1892, and our roots are kind of in the Methodist Church and the Methodist tradition. Although I think it's fair to say that Iliff has always been on the sort of progressive or cutting edge of that theological tradition. And seriously, in some ways, like really from its very beginning, right? Iliff has been kind of known as a progressive place. mean, just one example I like to point out to students is during the 1920s when the Scopes trial was going on, and there was a lot of ferment in the country around evolution, right? Iliff's president at that time sort of came out publicly in the press and was like, look, here at Iliff, like, we don't necessarily see this conflict between religious faith and science, right? They don't have to butt heads together. And sort of shortly after he did that, the conservative Presbyterians, JV, came out. They actually bought a full page ad in what was then the Rocky Mountain newspaper, and were very clear that we will never send any of our students to Iliff to be educated for the ministry. So this really does, like, this commitment to sort of like interdisciplinary theological studies really goes back a good ways. And so now where we're at, I think for folks who know about us, we kind of really are recognized as being a real premier seminary around like integrating sort of social justice and ethics in everything we do, as well as being really, really open and encouraging of not just ecumenical, but interfaith dialogue as well. And for Iliff, that's a core value for ours, right? I mean, America, as you probably both know, it's becoming more, not less, religiously diverse. Not in all places, but taken as a whole. And so a core value of Iliff is that all of our graduates will really know how to navigate religious difference in a respectful way, right? Like towards the common good, without feeling like you've got to resolve, right? Sometimes difference is difference and you got to let it be, right? And not try to gloss over it. And so our students' body is one of the most religiously diverse in the United States. It's around about 30 different faith traditions, all of the mainline represented, right? Methodist, Episcopal, United Church of Christ. But we also have a goodly amount of Unitarian Universalists. We always have a few Buddhist and Jewish students, usually every year. And lately, probably within the last decade, but probably more the last 7 years, a lot of students who identify as like pagan or a neo-pagan tradition or Wiccan as well. And that tends to raise the eyebrows of some of our more conservative seminary institutions. But again, we think that creates a really rich dialogue in the classroom that you might not find at other places. And we have agnostic and atheist students too, right? Who are interested in religion more as an intellectual category. And some of them even want to go on to a PhD, right? To teach a variety of traditions. And then we also have a lot of seekers and what some people call nuns, right? Like none of the above. So we do have a large swath of students, again, in the last few years who like, they dig Jesus and like his ministry with the poor and the oppressed, but like they're not ready to plant their flag in any sort of institutional faith formation yet. They're just really skeptical about that. And so all these folks are more than welcome at Iliff. We do not require a uniform faith statement from anyone, students, faculty, staff. So another core value of Iliff is intellectual and academic freedom, right, across the board.
I would just also note, I mean, probably, I think none is officially our second largest religious tradition, which sounds like unusual. Like, why would all these people be getting a theology degree if they're not affiliated with anything religious? But I think that's because a large percentage of our student body identifies as queer in one way or another, and many of them are refugees from evangelical and fundamentalist kind of religious traditions. So no longer think of institutional religion as a positive force, but are sort of still God haunted in important ways. And so it's always interesting to me to look at the significations of people and then look at the people in my classroom and be like, okay, I don't see a lot of nuns out there. So I think that category is a really funny one, just, I mean, in general in the US right now, but also at our student body.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. Oh, that's lovely too. I like that phrase, God haunted, as well. Yeah, and that leads perfectly into the next point. This really sets Iliff apart in the fact that I think we're up to now 34% of our student body identifies as part of the LGBTQIA plus community in some way. That's huge, friends, right? Like that's big, even not for a seminary, right? Like a liberal arts college in Boston, that would be a big number. And so again, this is intentional. It wasn't accidental. Iliff, like, institutionally made a decision that we wanted to be a place that wasn't just like, y'all are welcome here. but don't be open about it, right? Like a lot of schools do that. We were like, we want you to be leaders here, right? And so our LGBTQIA plus students really do have a lot of support that you might not get in other schools for your journey, whether that's toward ordained, recognized ministry, or a ministry of your own making, right? In many ways. So we're very proud to do that. Our diversity extends to our faculty. About 46% right now, I believe, of our faculty are women and scholars of color. We have a ton of online, hybrid, and residential options. And Iliff was actually one of the leaders back in 2007, a long time ago now. Iliff started exploring what quality online hybrid theological master's level education would look like. And so, I mean, I don't know, I guess that's sort of a boast, but it's really just about time, right? When you're the first to try something, you've got more time to figure out what doesn't work and improve that. And so when the COVID pandemic hit, unlike some schools, it didn't take a lot of energy to pivot, right, into being fully online. Our faculty were already trained how to do that. And that makes a big difference. We're also, we have some really interesting initiatives that are housed within Iliff too. This is another value of Iliff, is being in dialogue with folks outside of academia, right? And outside of our own academic walls. And so we have an eco-justice center that's run by one of our faculty members, Dr. Miguel de la Torre. He has taken students to the Amazon before, right? So a really cool learning opportunity there. We have an Institute for Religion, Politics, and Culture that's kind of newly off the ground. Dr. Amanda Henderson, soon to be doctor, right? She's doing her PhD now, is leading that. And she is doing podcasts with one of our current students around that. And she has a long, long history as previously as the director of the help me, Catherine, the Interfaith Coalition, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, don't ask me that.
Yeah, I think it's the Interfaith Coalition. I mean, it's a national
Interfaith Alliance, Denver.
Interfaith Alliance, Colorado. Thank you. So, yeah. and they do a lot of work around, whatever, gun control, a lot of advocacy work at the Capitol, right, around legislation. So she's with us now and heading up that institute. And we even have a new institute around theology and artificial intelligence, which people are always like, what? But they've worked with like Silicon Valley folks and have been doing really cool things around like how to make AI to incorporate sort of bias catching within AI, whether that's in applications for jobs or seminary or schools. A lot of really, really interesting, again, cutting edge stuff that not a lot of other schools are doing. And then the last thing, so to me, this is funny. To me, like when people like give me one example of like how quirky and cool Iliff is, this says a lot to me because it makes me laugh. We talk a lot at Iliff about like the interdisciplinary nature of religion studies at our school, right? So like theology along with fill in the blank, whatever it is, pastoral care, Buddhism. So we're one of only 4 ATS accredited seminaries in North America that has a Jewish woman teaching in the New Testament studies area. That's Dr. Pam Eisenbaum. So, but her specialty is actually the Apostle Paul, right? And what cracks me up is that she is also married to another one of our faculty members, Dr. Mark George, who happens to be Presbyterian, and his academic specialty is the book of Job in the Hebrew Bible. So interdisciplinary in many different ways at Iliff. All right, I'm going to hand it over back to Dr. Turpin to start to talk to us about the Master of Divinity program itself and the curriculum.
Sure. So I actually have a Master of Divinity. And one of the things I like to confess is that when I ended up in that program, I didn't really know what it was, which is to say it's a professional degree program akin to law school or med school for clergy, right? Historically, clergy got first the Bachelor of Divinity and now the MDiv. So it blends academic and professional sort of development in the program. So that makes it different from some of our other degree programs, which are, much more only academically focused, right? So like the MTS or the PhD, things like that. So it's that's an important thing to know. It's probably the most recognizable sort of theological degree. And certainly like if you want to be ordained in many denominations, this is the one you need to have, or if you want to be endorsed as a chaplain in some ways, sometimes this is the one that's most important. But it's a weird title to carry, the Master of Divinity. I don't know, it sounds like some role in Dungeons and Dragons or something. I don't know. Anyway, but it's a historic kind of name. So it's a 3-year degree, 120 credits. Those are quarter credits, which is why that number is so high. It's equivalent, I think, in semester credits is between 85 and 90, if that is the language you're used to. We are on a quarter system, primarily because of our relationship with the University of Denver, which we're kind of located in the middle of, and we have a couple of joint programs, and they have stayed on the quarter system. So we have too. It's a broad degree. So like in law school or other kinds of degree programs where you're going to be professionally recognized as someone competent to do things in that field, there's not specialties within the MDiv. You learn a broad range of things that are helpful in the professions related to this degree. So at Iliff, one of the unique things about Iliff is it was one of the very first seminaries to include comparative religious traditions as one of the competencies. So even before I ever came, it was a requirement in the MDiv to take at least one course, and now 2 in religious traditions other than Christianity, right, at a Christian school. So that was an early commitment of the school that has maintained. But also things like the historical development of religious traditions and working with sacred texts and doing social and contextual analysis. So understanding the communities in which you're going to serve and the sort of dynamics going on there. Constructive theology. We still bear the title theology both in the name of the school and in this area of the curriculum, this in the practical theology. That's a historically Christian word. The sort of word I think in Jewish or Buddhist thought would be philosophy more commonly, and in Islam it tends to be law. But basically theology meaning sort of thinking about big questions with the aid of a historic tradition in some way. And then theology and religious practices, which is where I live, which are things like preaching, worship, religious education, leadership, community organizing, finance kind of classes, financial management, things like that. So, and in MDiv, we do 2 classes in each of those, 3 in Bible, just because the Hebrew Bible is 66, 67 books. It's very long. It takes a long time to understand. So everybody takes those. There's a year-long formational process in the first year, which is called Identity, Power, and Vocation and Community, which has to do with understanding sort of your own social location, thinking about justice in complex ways, trying to sort out what it means to be a person embedded in the US context or globally in the body that you're in certain ways. And then also thinking about questions of the communities in which we're embedded and how they shape our vocation. So that's a really sort of signature Iliff class. It's changed over the years in its format, but is a small group kind of class that usually no more than 8 students. So you spend the whole year together, which is really important for just having a community to learn in and things like that. And then also in the second or third year in the MDiv, there's a year-long internship. And it varies where people serve those based on what they're already doing and what kind of learning goals they have and things like that. But they range from everything from being in faith communities to being in sort of nonprofit settings that are religiously oriented or that in some way can be related to the study of the student. So I think we have here, it's 14 hours a week. So it's a part-time internship for a full year. And again, you stay with the same cohort in that class, and it's a small class. So both of those opportunities are really great, I think, in terms of getting to know groups of students that you're walking through this journey with and being support to one another, but also being able to have hard conversations about the realities of what it's like to actually work in the world and try to, live into your vocation in the midst of institutions that are not always flexible and or built exactly for you and not always doing exactly what you want them to do in the world. But anyway, so that's internship. And I would say we still have internship groups that meet like 8 and 10 years after they've left here. So those can, I mean, it varies, right? Any small group is interesting and sometimes they really gel and sometimes they don't, but we do have some that they continue to be a support to each other as they're working out in the professional world. So are there any questions just about the MDiv program and what it looks like, or what the parts of learning that are important in it that you would want to ask? Maybe we could bring ourselves back to screen here, Daniel, just so we can see each other for a sec.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
You said the second or third year of the internship, is it not both years? It's not 2 years, just 1 year is an internship, so the other 2 years would be pretty much academically focused.
Yeah, I mean, so many of the classes are, in assignments and in other ways focused on sort of real things in the world, not just academic. That word academic is a hard one, right? Or theory. I think that we're pretty committed to a theory praxis blend across the curriculum, but yeah, the internship part of it is only 1 year in terms of the formal relationship. And part of that is because when you do an internship, not only are you in relationship with your colleagues in the group and an instructor at Iliff, but also you have an on-site supervisor who's committed to you and an on-site sort of community committee that's committed to you and your formation for that whole year. So it's just a huge investment in terms of person power for that year. That's a really great thing. I think, I'll speak here in clergy terms, but like that means if you're serving an internship in a church, you have a committee of lay people in the church who give you feedback about your work, which is an unusual thing compared to, and if you're in a homeless shelter, it might be clients of that shelter, or if it's, so I think that's a really interesting feature of our internship. But because of the organizational sort of power that takes to get all of those people in motion and doing their thing, a year is what we do. I think I know there are some places that do 2 years of placement, in different kinds of settings often, but we've stuck with the 1 year.
Yeah, and I guess I would add on that too. The truth is we have so many students from all across the United States, right, who are in the MDiv Journey version of our program, right, which doesn't require you to live in Colorado. And so, as you might imagine, it'd be silly of us to require them to do their internship in Denver, right? And so, I just want to be clear that our Office of Professional Formation are the wonderful folks that helps everyone find an internship in their geographical location that makes sense for them, and they do an outstanding job. I have hardly ever heard of somebody that's got a bad internship, right? Like sometimes you can't control that. But it's pretty amazing. And again, as Dr. Turpin said, it's super flexible. It does not have to be in a faith community, but some folks are required to do that, right? It's like you need to be in a parish or whatever, or a synagogue. But Iliff has sort of a national network, right, of places and kind of knows what works for folks. So again, as we kind of said at the beginning, every MDiv does a lot of things similar, and internship is one of those similar things, but not every school like us actually has that as such a collaborative process, right? Sometimes some of them are like, this is where you got to do your internship, right? Or here's 2 choices and that's kind of it. We're a bit more collaborative, I think, at Iliff. I think that's fair to say, Catherine. Yeah.
Well, and that course, every student sets their own learning goals for the internship. They negotiate that with their site and the work that they're doing. And so it's really, I think, one of the places in the curriculum where we take adult education most seriously in terms of the way that it's designed pedagogically. That can be a little intimidating. It's a lot of work to do all of that negotiating, but I think in a lot of cases, right? People are people and sites are sites, and things, go well. Sometimes they don't. But I think for the most part, everybody has a chance to figure out something about themselves and their work in that year, right? In important ways, for sure.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that question. Had a couple more folks join us. Reverend Diana and Joy, do you want to introduce yourselves real quick? Just name where you're zooming in from and your faith tradition, if you want to share that.
Sure, I can do that. And I'll also apologize that my elderly cat is going to keep interrupting us occasionally. He's quieter if I don't try and make him leave. So I'm Diana McLean. I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister and a 2016 Iliff MDiv grad. And I am living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My wife is also a UU minister, not from Iliff, and she and I run an entrepreneurial ministry together. So that's the short version. And I did 5 years of parish ministry before making that switch, so I can kind of relate to both worlds.
Love it. Thank you, Diana. And hi, Joy. Are you
Yeah, I'm here. Praise God, everyone. My name is Joy. I'm Joyce Nazwa. That is my name. I'm from Uganda. I'm glad to be here. Currently, I'm in Dubai, UAE. I feel so happy to be in this, to be part of the Iliff team, and I'll be glad to meet you all. Thank you.
Yes, and yeah, congratulations, Joy, because I mean you were recently admitted into the program, right? Yeah, so great.
Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm so glad that you could join us today.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, so I'll we don't have that much longer to go on the presentation part, and then we've got at least one alumni who's going to share their experience in the program, so you can talk to somebody who's not a faculty member or an admissions rep, right, about their experience here. So I'm going to go back here real quick. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Yeah, so I guess the last thing in bold at the very bottom right hand part of the slide is the denominational requirements. I think that's just about like obviously if you're a Buddhist, you're not going to take the history of Methodist doctrine, right? Like unless you want to. If you're Episcopalian, that also probably wouldn't be as helpful as taking Anglican liturgy, etc. So because Iliff is so diverse religiously, we have faculty and then often adjunct faculty, right, to teach particular faith tradition requirements within the MDiv, right? So our Lutheran study, Lutheran students, right, will take a certain kind of a set of Lutheran history, doctrine, liturgy courses. Same for Anglicans, United Church of Christ, UCC, Unitarian Universalists, etc. I don't know if you want to say any more about that, Catherine?
Just to say that if you are thinking you're going to be ordained and you're already in the in-care process, Jackie, so you already know this, but it's important to communicate early and often with the denominational people about what those requirements are. You can graduate with an MDiv, but not have taken all the courses that you need for ordination unless we're paying attention to that along the way. So, and that varies so much regionally by body that we just have to be sure that students are really in communication with their denominational people and then with us so that we can be sure that everybody gets what they need in the time that they need it. And sometimes those are dramatic differences. And I'll use Diana as an example, right? In the UU tradition, internship has to be full-time. It's a year long. That's a different kind of structure than what we set up. So if she didn't know that coming in, she might end up having to do another year of internship to be ordained right afterwards. So we just want to make sure we're paying attention to that early so that everybody gets what they need.
Great. That's really helpful. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Yeah, we have a lot of alumni and current students joining us. Yay for the next portion of the program. Cool. So this slide, we'll just cover this briefly. If you were here at the beginning, you heard me say that I earned my MDiv from Iliff in 2002, and I had a social justice and ethics concentration. So you can do an MDiv at Iliff. We do have concentrations available. You'll see on this slide. There are some different options: biblical studies, congregational practices, gender and sexuality, social justice and ethics, spiritual care and chaplaincy, etc. It basically really only requires sort of a set of 4 courses, although you can do more in that curriculum area for sure. And it's noted on your transcript, not on your diploma. But it can be helpful for some folks, particularly like when you're applying for a job post-graduation. I mean, when I started working, so my first job after Iliff was actually as a mental health care union organizer for the Service Employees International Union in Denver. And they kind of knew me because I sort of did part of my internship with them. But I still had to interview for the job, and a lot of the folks, they didn't know what theology was exactly on their board. And so, they had some questions about, what's an MDiv? That sounds bizarre. And why would this person want to be in a job like this? And it was actually helpful for me to be like, hey, I actually have a concentration in social justice and ethics. So I studied things sort of like African, American liberation, right? And the civil rights struggle and the freedom struggle in this country, et cetera, and was able to and that became a really interesting conversation during that interview, and I got the job. So So that is that, I guess. I guess I'll pause. Any questions about that? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You don't have to do a concentration, I guess I should say, but you can if you want to. This would be another thing too to know is that some seminaries, their MDiv's pretty chock full of requirements, right? Like Iliff has tons of open electives, right? Which I think is one of the main benefits of it. I didn't have to do an MDiv myself, I was there, but I wanted to because I actually wanted that extra third year to actually take more courses that I was interested in. Application deadline, some of you may already know this, but essentially we are on the quarter system, as Dr. Turpin mentioned later. So that means basically fall, winter, spring are our main terms with an optional summer, although most folks tend to do that more toward the end of their degree if they're trying to get out of here. But they're 10-week terms, but you can only start a new degree program in either the fall or the winter. So for us, that means our fall classes begin in September. There's a January 31st priority application deadline, and August 14th is the final deadline to get your application in. The priority deadline of January 31st is there, just that's when we know our budget the best. So it's kind of first come, first serve in terms of any institutional monies you may qualify for, right, from Iliff in terms of scholarship. So always a good idea to submit your application by that deadline if possible, but you do have all the way up to August 14th. And I always encourage folks to just think about, in terms of submitting your application, it's really about striking a balance between getting in your application sort of within the timeline as early as you can to put yourself in the best position, but also doing the best possible application you can, right? So if you're submitting by January 31st, but you've written a really poor essay and you needed more time, yeah, don't do that. Wait, don't worry about it. Plenty of people, we admit people, I mean, who literally by midnight on August 14th got their application in, and they got a fine scholarship from us, right? So you never know. Winter, December 1st is your deadline to get in. So there's still time. If you want to start this coming January of 2023, you got a couple months to go ahead and get your application in. I think our admissions requirements are pretty standard. You see our link there, apply.iliff.edu. You create your own account. You can kind of go in and out of it, right? So you can work on your application in sections. It's not timed or anything, so don't worry about that. We need an essay, basically a resume / CV. Copies, at least unofficial, although we will need it official eventually if you're admitted, of every college, university you've ever been to, and we're not kidding about that. We're required by the Department of Education to have that, and we have to calculate your overall GPA anyway. So that's why that's important. But you can, if you have unofficial copies of your transcript, that's fine. We can work with that and give you an admissions decision, and we'll just follow up with you to make sure you get in your official copies eventually. And those can all be sort of requested and sent electronically, or they can be mailed to us. And then 2 to 4 letters of recommendation. In our online application portal, you just kind of put down the contact info for your letters of reference, and our system takes care of the rest, sends out an automatic email to them and lets them know what kind of letter and what questions to answer for you. And as long as we have 2 letters of recommendation, LORs for you, we can move your application forward to review. And so we invite you to create change and take action. And keep discerning, and we're here to help you discern if Iliff's the place for you and to support you moving forward. I'm going to stop sharing now. We can all see each other in our like little Brady Bunch boxes. And before we kind of welcome some of our current students and alumni too for a conversation about their experience in the MDiv program, any questions about the application process, due dates, and that kind of thing?
I have questions that aren't about the application, about the program. Is that okay?
Yeah, please. Yeah, now's the time. Let's do it.
So I think a lot of this probably you can find when you just search around the different web pages on the MDiv homepage. So for example, I think I found like a Excel spreadsheet of current course listings because that's one thing that's really interesting to me is determining if there's enough diversity. Essentially, I want to be able to kind of learn about everything. I want to learn about Kabbalah, and I want to learn about Sufism. I want to learn about, just different sub, traditions within a larger tradition. So is there anything else you could possibly point me to, or am I kind of already on the trail, basically do what I'm doing? Fine, that's that Excel spreadsheet that I talked about. And I think there was one other thing that I found, like a sample schedule of possible courses, something about Tupac and God. And I was like, sweet, that's crazy. I'd love to learn about that. But yeah, any suggestions for that? Just
right.
to like figure out what's out there.
Yeah. So for folks who may not know, so this is just the landing page of our main website. Everybody see that? And yeah, so under the academics tab, if you go down to academic calendar, this little side window pops out for course schedule. When you go there and scroll down, and yeah, you can kind of see like the current term we're in, fall 2022 here, and scroll down and you can see all the classes. It always starts with residential first. So like T's for Tuesday, R's for Thursday, W for Wednesday. So you can kind of see the courses that we're offering like right now, right at Iliff. Fanon Foucault and friends. There you go. So hopefully you're into like post-colonialism because there's a lot of that. You got Hebrew 1, et cetera, et cetera. Then it goes into sort of the online, right? Only classes here, and then hybrid usually are listed last. So food, faith, and land, Christianity and science, ethical now, religions of the world. So Jacob Kennard is our primary sort of comparative religious professor who does kind of specialize in the areas of Buddhism and Hinduism. Yep. See, there you go. He's teaching 2 classes. And so that's how if you click on these, usually there's a little, description, which can be helpful. If I go out of this though, too, you see this 2022, 2023 tentative, and that brings up the Excel sheet that I think you were talking about, JP, probably, right? And so you can kind of navigate to the next term here. Now this really is tentative. These can totally change, but you can kind of see spiritual care and sexuality is being planned, spiritual care and death and dying, aging, health and justice, Anglican spirituality coming up online, Buddhism will be coming up, still Black, post-humanism theology. So yeah, a lot of interesting stuff. And then so you can kind of see, and then as we get further in, it gets even more tentative, right? But it goes up to summer of 2023 so far.
It's very tentative in that nothing is scheduled yet.
Yeah.
I just want to be real honest, JP. So our comparative religion classes tend to be taught either by Jacob, who's a South Asianist. So he does Hinduism, Buddhism, and then the religions in the world, which is an overview class, often for people who haven't had any exposure to sort of religious traditions outside of Christianity. We have the Tinker Professorship, which means we are teaching an indigenous kind of religious traditions every year. And then we have another visiting one that means that we often have someone from Islam teaching every year, the Everding lecture. Beyond that, you're not going to see much on the schedule. And I just want to say that to you because I don't want you to feel like, oh, I'm going to come in and learn about these other things that are pretty much not going to be there. So, we have had a person for the last 2 years doing Asian traditions broadly, some more Confucian kind of animism, other kinds of things related to that. But he's moved on and gotten a tenure track job elsewhere. So it depends on the faculty that we're bringing in as adjuncts, what we teach outside of those areas. So I just want to be super honest about that. I don't want to bait and switch you that, because we are historically Christian and serving a lot of people heading on towards sort of ordination, that affects our course schedule a lot and the faculty that are here. So Pam will teach Judaism too. Sorry, I left her out. And also Jewish Christian relations. And Albert Hernandez, who's our historian, specializes in medieval Islam, so he'll teach that often. So I don't want you to be like, where's the Sufism? Like, yeah, it hasn't been here since we lost this particular faculty member who used to teach it, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to be honest.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's super helpful. And I can sort of say from my perspective too, in admissions, I mean, it is kind of funny. A lot of the curriculum and stuff in terms of the comparative, like it depends on where you're at contextually, right? Like, I mean, it's just really interesting when you're looking at like all the ATS accredited seminaries. I mean, yeah, like, you know, most folks are like, man, Iliff is like so way over there, right? Interfaith stuff, like it's incredible. But like, yeah, sometimes we will get students. I know we've had students before, you know, who might be, you know, in a Wiccan or neo-pagan tradition, right? And like sometimes they might get frustrated with some of like even the liberal crit, like they're just like, oh my God, there's so much Jesus in this class, right? Whereas somebody else, you know, are like, what are you talking about, right? This is like, this class is full of heresy. Like, so it is really, really interesting and beyond perspective. But yeah, the point about like what we're teaching is really dependent on the faculty, right? It is true. Like I think every class I would say though is taught like like general pastoral and spiritual care. It's absolutely taught from a multicultural perspective. But yeah, but just because of like the whole history of that, even, you know, as being an academic subject, right, it's heavily influenced by the Christian context, right, of North America. So great question, and Dr. Turin, wonderful response. Thank you for that. Any other questions before we open up to our current student and alum panel?
I do have a couple more, if that's okay. This is my first time doing one of these, so I really want to get some information out of them.
Yeah,
I appreciate
absolutely.
you all being here and taking the time. So if that's okay.
Yeah.
If anybody
please.
else has a question though, don't want to take up. Jackie, do you have a question at all? I don't want to take up time. Okay. This is application related or admissions related. So this one's quite specific and I don't mind sharing it. But I think it'll be helpful to hear your response. So I have a 3.5 GPA, you know, relatively average, but there's a couple of courses in my transcript where, because of just mental health stuff that was going on, I literally got an F or a D. I retook those classes and got A's, the exact same classes, and that's shown on the transcript. Do I need to explain that in like a statement of purpose or the essay? Should I try to explain that to the admissions committee at all, or is it, you'll see that I retook the classes and I got a better grade, I clearly worked it out? I'm just wondering whether I should make a note about that.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I think in that particular example you mentioned, you don't need to mention it, but you certainly can if you want to, and you know, maybe just a sentence or two at the most, right? If you want to. I think our admissions committee that reads the applications is pretty savvy to be able to. I mean, that's one of the reasons we ask for transcripts, right? Is to be able to see that. Actually, that GPA is excellent, right? Our minimum, I think, is like a 2.75, and we've admitted people under that minimum, quite frankly. Fit for Iliff is really the most important thing, right? And there are all kinds of reasons. Yeah, folks might it might be struggling throughout their undergraduate or even graduate career, right? In another, and so I think we're able to see that, right? Some folks get, you know, diagnosed with bipolar disorder as young adults, right? Like in their 20s, and school academic stuff sometimes suffers because of that, right? Or whatever family, personal tragedies occur. And then other times too, you can kind of see, you're like, oh, like you look at somebody's transcript and be like, wow, they like obviously their parents wanted them to go into biochem, and they were really bad. Once they switched to philosophy and religious studies, like straight A's, you're like, okay, awesome. So
I'd also say, I mean, our average student age is 41, I think. So we also know that people have grown and learned and done a lot of things since they went to college sometimes, right? So I think we hold those records as important, but also the letters of reference and the personal statement really are ways into people's lives that are important to us in terms of figuring out where they are now and what they're able to do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, but you should feel free if you feel like you want to add, or you're feeling impelled to just add a line there. I think you absolutely can do that. I mean, being authentic, right, and transparent is an important part, right? Like, I mean, some of that comes with just wisdom and experience in living too, right? But like, again, right, there is a difference between, again, the admissions committee is savvy, right? And I think that they can tell, like, when a student like is sort of done a cut and paste essay, right? Or maybe they're applying to several different seminaries, and so they haven't spent the time to know what kind of place Iliff really is, right? Like you can tell that, and you can also tell when somebody's just like name dropping theologians they think we want them to know about. And so all that is just to say, like, it's up to you, but that can go a long way, right? When a student is like, look, you know, like, I think my GPA is good. You might notice that there's some faltering here and there, and like, here's what was going on with me. You shouldn't feel like you have to do that. But if you feel impelled to, that's good. Like, what would be bad is if like, it's super obvious from the transcript, right? And it's kind of all over the place, and it raises some eyebrows, and like a student like that didn't address it at all. That would probably be something the admissions committee was like, well, we kind of want to admit you because of the other part, but we have some questions about this. Whereas if that student was just like, look, here's what the deal was, then that's just like, totally makes sense. We got it. No problem. You know, welcome. So another great question, JP. Thank you. And did you have another one? Did you say you had a couple? Can't remember.
Yeah, the only other one I had was whether it's encouraged or recommended to, I know certain graduate programs maybe a little bit more academically oriented, people are going on to get PhDs, maybe it's for that. I guess I've never applied to graduate school before, so I'm new to the process, but reaching out to professors, current professors, and being like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I'm interested in, you seem like an interesting person. I don't really know if that's a thing people do with MDiv grad programs. Anyway, I'm just curious if applicants do that, if you recommend it or encourage it, or if it's not really something that people do.
I would say with our degree programs, that generally happens more with the doctoral programs, the Doctor of Ministry and the PhD.
Right. Okay.
And that's because if you're going to write an extended dissertation, you need to be sure that there's somebody there who matches your interest enough that it's going to work out. I think for the MDiv, we work with everybody, all of us do. So it's not as critical to do that kind of reaching out. I mean, we're always happy to talk to you, you know, if you want, if you want to reach out. But yeah, it's not necessary at all.
Okay, great. Okay, yes, good questions. All right. So our let's see, how many, so our alumni or current student ambassadors, yeah. Okay, so Diana introduced herself. I'm going to let Lou and Dennis introduce themselves. And then I guess we're going to open it up for all of you to, yeah, just kind of just talk about your experience in the MDiv. So Dennis, Lou, which one of you wants to go first and just introduce yourself? We were doing introductions earlier. It was basically you name kind of your geographical location and like your faith tradition or current, you know, context, vocational context.
I can go. Hopefully you guys can hear me well enough. My internet is weird today. So
that's great.
I'm Lou. I am currently in Chicago, MDiv program. I actually started this program a few years ago and had some mental health stuff and withdrew. And last year was my first year of completion. Yeah, I guess that's all I need to say right now, I think.
I'm Dennis. I recently graduated from the MDiv, and I'm currently in Denver, and I'm still at Iliff. I'm in the joint doctoral program with Iliff and DU, so I'll be here for a few years more. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you both. Great. Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna open it up. I don't know who wants to go first. If y'all have chatted about this in terms of the panel, but I mean, my understanding is that yeah, that we just kind of thought this was a good opportunity, right, for interested prospective students and newly admitted students in one case to kind of hear about what your experience has been at Iliff in the MDiv program, either what you think was unique about it, yeah, whatever you think is going to be helpful. So anyone in particular want to go first?
I can. We did not strategize about this at all.
Okay,
So
no worries.
hopefully what I will offer is helpful. So as I said, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and that means in my case, I was raised in a non-Christian tradition and serve in a not explicitly Christian. We have Christian UUs and non-Christian UUs. And I had originally assumed that I would attend a Unitarian Universalist seminary, and then was encouraged and thought it was wise to consider attending progressive Christian seminary where I would get more exposure to people of different faiths, but also to fill in some gaps in my religious and cultural literacy around Hebrew and Christian scripture, around how various Christian faiths operate in the world today. And that was probably, if I had to choose one most valuable thing, there are many things that I find valuable from my Iliff education, but one of them was being part of an interfaith cohort. So Catherine spoke about, it's called something different now, but the first year program where you're in a small cohort that hangs together. I was a January start student, which worked fine. If anybody's considering that, it worked out really well. And we, at the time, it was 2 classes. Vocation and orientation came first, where we talked about our calls to ministry a lot. And then the second one was identity, power, and difference. And that was very focused on what it sounds like, systems of privilege and oppression. And I both experienced a completely welcoming atmosphere for myself as a non-Christian who is also queer. And that was important to me in a seminary, that I could be fully myself as I moved into ministry. And I did get a cohort, and I'm still in touch with many of them. And I graduated 6 years ago. A cohort where there's an Episcopal priest and a Methodist pastor and, you know, a variety of others, mostly Christian. And it was super helpful to be able to talk things through with them and say, hey, I'm not quite getting this. Can somebody explain it to me who has lived in Christianity their whole life? And yet to be in a progressive setting. So that was a huge thing for me. I did, as Catherine mentioned, I had to do a full-time internship. So I was there for 3.5 years because that meant I could take fewer other things while doing my internship. So the January start meant that I graduated in June with my cohort. I loved my Iliff experience, and I'm super glad that that's where I chose to get my MDiv. So I'm happy to talk to anybody. And I was a student ambassador on campus while I was a student. So I have had that experience as well. And I'm happy to just answer any questions on any topic.
Well, if you can't tell that I like Iliff, it's like posted on my wall right there. Yeah, there you go. But this is the old, I gotta update my the logo's changed now, so I need to update that. But yeah, I came to Iliff. I guess my expectation was that I might go into pastoral ministry, because I guess that's what I think of for seminaries. And I grew up in a Pentecostal tradition, so coming to Iliff was a different environment for me. And the culture, I think Pentecostalism in itself lends itself to very conservative beliefs in terms of Christianity. So coming to Iliff, I think, was really transformative for me in terms of ideologies. And I think that was a really important thing why I chose Iliff, because when I was looking for seminaries, I wanted someplace that's very progressive and very open to all different cultures. And even though I think this is changing, but even though it was considered United Methodist, like as the denominations affiliated with Iliff, I think I wanted to be in a different space to see how Christianity was done differently. And so coming there, it was just an amazing experience for me. And after my first year of wrestling with theology, and I'm like, this doesn't seem like something I'm like interested in, like in terms of pastoral ministry. I encountered liberation theologies with Dr. De La Torre, and that transformed my whole experience. From what I expected my time at Iliff to be, changed completely. And that's when I heard Brother Daniel mention that he did social justice and ethics, and that's that became my focus when once I encountered that there's something more than just the traditional theologies that are usually expected in some, I guess, more conservative seminaries. So that shift had happened, and I just, from there on, I start taking all these different courses that are, you know, focused on like post-colonial studies. Especially I'm coming from Guyana, which is a country colonized by the British, and initially the Dutch, then the British, and really looking into that history and that like impact that has on that culture, I think is why now I'm continuing on to do a doctoral studies in terms of really understanding the impact and how we can create change within that culture. And not just from a Christian perspective, I think from just examining the overall impact that colonialism has on so many cultures. And that's something I've been working on. Yeah, so there's so many courses you can take if that's like your interest. I think post-colonial studies, I did that class that we saw on the screen, Still Black, Post-Human. I thought that was, it was something I was like skeptical at first, because I'm like, I'm trying to focus on colonialism, and then I'm like now moving to focus on what is post-humanism or something, like moving beyond the concept of human. And that was also a very transformative like experience for me, because these are ideas that I don't think I'd encounter at a very conservative school or something, because I think we'd stick with what the meaning of human is. And so to really have that experience and the exposure to all these different like courses that are available, I think is one of the things that made my experience of Iliff such a meaningful one. And it's a place I really like value learning and being in community. I think I worked with Brother Daniel and Dr. Cruzmark in admissions as a student ambassador, just as Diana did for the past 2 years. So for over the summer, it just ended. So that was also a part of me being really close to this community. And yeah, you'll find when you're here, you build community easily, and you feel very connected to it. Well, hopefully you do, because it's such a small space. I think it's hard not to be in community. So yeah.
That's good. Thank you so much, Dennis. Yeah, and you just reminded me, I don't think we mentioned this in our presentation, but yeah, the kind of average, student to teacher ratio in a class, I think, is like 1 to 16, and some classes are as small as 1 to 7 students, 1 professor. And almost all our courses, I think, like even like Intro to Hebrew Bible or New Testament that a lot of MDiv students take, are capped at 35 to preserve that real relational feeling, right? And that's the same even for the online only courses, right? So some students I'm talking to who are trying to transfer out because they're in an online program they don't like. It's more like, it's like hundreds, right, of students, and it's not helpful to them. And so they're encouraged by the fact that relationality and that kind of intimacy that Dennis mentioned is really a core part of our pedagogy, right? Is that you're going to learn as much from your fellow students as you will from your professor, given the diversity of our student body. So thank you for that. Lou, would you like to go next? And then David Kia, who's a current MDiv student, has joined us, and I'll invite him to introduce himself in a minute. But Lou, would you like to go?
What brought me to Iliff was, as a queer person, I was looking for a seminary that was more accepting and more liberal, because I felt like I had been beat up by religion most of my life, and I didn't want to continue that with school. And I was kind of raised in Disciples of Christ and kept with that. And then I kind of moved around, with just going to more, growing up in rural Missouri, I was more in conservative Christian churches, and I wasn't really accepted. And so I kind of moved around to American Baptist, Unity Church, and all this stuff. And now I'm kind of back in Disciples of Christ. So I really kind of consider myself more interfaith, and I've really enjoyed these classes because you really do get different faith traditions from the students and the diversity within the students of different people. And when I first started, I was in class with a lot of pagan people, and that was very eye-opening to me, just because, of what we think God is or what we believe and those kind of things and how that shows up in our lives. And but I find that the Journey program is really good just because it does build community, and you really get to meet the people that you're doing this with. And I started in January, so I didn't really feel that connected to a cohort in the beginning. But I had a cohort after the first journey week that kind of adopted me in. There was a few of us that they're like, oh, you're with us now. And I'm still friends with a lot of those people, and they've all graduated because I took time off, you know, and so most of them have graduated now, but we're still in communication. We still network together and do things together, which has been really meaningful to me. I think something that I've realized, and because I tend to be more of an introvert, is that I find that I've needed more support just in my own life to get through seminary. You're going to deal with a lot of healing, whether you have religious trauma or other trauma. It brings up a lot of your own identity and things that you that kind of shape your life and your belief system. And what I find is that you know, you have fellow students, but a lot of them are going to be online or one week a term. But also, like, just in your own community, if you're not necessarily a member of a church, or you're not necessarily a member of any groups that understand what seminary is, because a lot of my friends are like, you're doing what? I don't even understand this, right? So I've really looked for people that understand that. And I actually just got a mentor through the Mentor Collective that Iliff offered, who is actually went to Iliff for her master's and is a minister. And she's totally been supportive of me. And we talk like once a week right now, just offering me that support, because I'm kind of in a discernment stage too of what to do next. I have this schooling, but am I going to be a chaplain? Am I going to be a minister? Am I going to continue doing street outreach, which is what I'm doing now, and more of the social work? So it's like, brings up a lot of things, but I think that diversity within Iliff and just the way you can go into ministry is really helpful for me too.
Lou, that is so wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, for sharing that. It really is amazing how our MDiv journey, non-residential program, right, creates these deep relationships. I've seen that over my 8 years in admissions, where, and sometimes it's funny. It's we've had sort of there's this funny cohort, all folks who have graduated with their MDiv from Iliff now, but like all in the Orlando, Florida area. And they all lived actually within like a 10-mile radius of each other, but never knew each other before they came to Iliff. And they all thought they were like the only like non-fundamentalist person in their area. And they learned about each other by all entering the journey program, just sort of through sheer, grace or accident at Iliff. And some of these folks, and they've been out of the program for 5-6 years, and they still meet like monthly for coffee, right, to support each other in the ministries they're doing now. So that is a really special kind of neat thing. So thank you. That David, I'm so glad you could join us. If you just want to share a little bit of your experience coming into the MDiv program. You're kind of in your first year, but maybe let folks know sort of like where you're from originally, why you picked Iliff, and how your experience has been so far.
All right, thank you. I'm David Kea, and I'm currently a first-year student at Iliff. Yeah, I joined in January of this year in the MDiv program, and it's so far going on well. Yeah, basing on the courses that I've so far completed, I'm seeing a big change in my life. And since I left my home country while I was working for the church, United Methodist Church, as the youth coordinator, I had a dream of coming up with a non-profit organization after school. Of course, I also want to be ordained, but on top of that, I want to come up with that organization. So basing on the courses that I've completed so far, there is one course that is called IPVC, Identity, Power, and Vocation, that I believe has helped me to get connections on how I'm going to go ahead with my dream of coming up with a non-profit organization. So, as I wait for the other courses that I'm going to do that are going to help me, so far I've gotten that. And then the other thing I would like to talk about is the hybrid and residential program that we have at Iliff that has also helped, especially in this time of COVID-19. By the time I came, it was COVID was still rampant, but I managed to cope up because of the hybrid program. I was doing everything online, and including the gathering days, we did everything online because of that program, that hybrid program. So just an encouragement to anyone who is planning to join Iliff, that you can do it wherever you are. You don't need to be on ground, because I have some friends back home who wanted to join, but because of the difficulties in obtaining the US visas, some of them end up giving up. But I just want to encourage them that you can do it online, you can do it through the hybrid program. Yeah, as you try also to look for the visa in case you want to be ground.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much, David. Yeah, I mean, David was so persistent. I'm sure many of you can imagine, yeah, during COVID, trying to come from Uganda to to Denver, Colorado, just so many, just you got the visa bureaucratic stuff, right? And the students trying to obtain visas, right? That looks completely different in different countries, but it's usually not easy. So yeah, David, we really enjoyed working with you to make that happen. You were really persistent, and it just really is great that we were able to make that happen and have you join our community on the ground now, right? But you were able to start doing the online piece. So great testimony. Appreciate it. Thank you all of our current students and alums for sharing your story. And I'm going to stop talking now and see if any of our prospective students have any questions of any of us here. Yeah, you can ask Catherine, you can ask me, or any of the students that you've just heard from.
I'll ask another question because I have so many. This is for the students, past students, and also I think Joy and David, you're both current students. Is that correct? I think. But for anybody, for all of you, I'm curious what the student experience is like in terms of actually going to class, whether it's online or in person. What the classes are actually like to be there, to be involved in them. Is it primarily discussion? You have a reading, you have a class reading the week before, you take notes on it, maybe you have a prompt, you have to write something down and you go, and is it primarily discussion based? Is it, the professor speaking quite a bit? What does that look like? And what are the advantages or pros and cons of that experience? What have you enjoyed or learned about that experience, or what, wasn't so great about it? So just, yeah, class life, and then maybe kind of in tandem with that, just your kind of weekly, daily experience of being a student at Iliff, what is that experience like? How has it been for you? So it's kind of a large question, so answer however you would like, but that'd be wonderful to hear.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joy. I've just been admitted. I'm not yet a student. I'm joining in January. So hopefully I'll be there in Denver in January. Joining with the winter intake. So maybe David can answer that now, and other students who are already on the ground because I'm just starting in January.
Yeah. So which current student or alum wants to answer that? I think it's a good question, right? What's it like in an embodied experience in the classroom and weekly?
I can talk a little bit about that. So I was officially a residential student, but I took almost half of my classes online because I was living closer to Boulder than Denver, and I was a single parent of an elementary school student when I started. So he wasn't quite at a point where I could be gone all the time for school. I will say that although I liked both classes, I really, I preferred the residential ones, the on-campus ones, because of the bonding that happened there. I bonded with my online cohort as well, but more so with the in-person class, keeping in mind again that I started 9 years ago. So it's been a while. In terms of your question about like the balance of lecture and discussion, that varied a lot by class. I feel like my memory is that the classes on Hebrew and Christian scripture were a little more heavy in the lecture direction. They were certainly not anything like all lecture. There was still lots of discussion, but they had more they had to convey to us as part of that. And we did absolutely have reading that we did in between as well. But I think it would be true to say that all of the classes had robust student discussion as part of the experience. And as somebody else said, we learned from each other as well as from our instructors. So I felt like the balance was good. In terms of like taking lots of notes, I am an inveterate note taker. Like that is how I process, is to take notes. So I took tons of notes, but often my notes were as much what classmates were saying as the official content of the class, because there were so many fascinating additions to the conversation from classmates. I sometimes felt like a little bit in over my head at first, particularly in scripture classes, because as I mentioned, that was unfamiliar to me. And so I really appreciated hearing the different viewpoints, different ways people had interpreted scripture prior to coming to seminary, and how everybody's minds were changing and shifting around that in class. So it felt like a really good dynamic.
I think weekly, you got to really commit a lot of time to doing stuff. And I think especially with online classes, you're responsible for most of the work to keeping up with it. And so you want to make sure you have a lot of time to do your readings. And usually for online classes, you'd have to make a post on Canvas and just to stay in conversation with the entire class. And one thing I know that with Iliff, with the quarter system, it goes by really quickly. So you fall behind in a week in your readings or something, you're way behind. And if you're trying to catch up, it's sometimes gets really difficult. So yeah, you'd want to really manage your time well, especially taking those online classes. And then the hybrid, what I remember from the hybrid class, initially when I started Iliff, it feels like you're alone doing this work. But then when I came to Denver that first quarter, meeting the cohort and bonding for that week on campus, that just like made me feel more connected. So if you can, I think at least the first quarter, if you can come, I think gathering days is mandatory, but if you can come at least that first quarter. I think it's such a good experience. You get to bond with these people that you're going to be in the program with for 3 years probably. And so that was a really good experience for me. Then I felt more connected to the material, because I think once I felt connected to the class, I felt more engaged, and participating becomes much easier, because then you understand personalities. Because sometimes when you write, if you're not too like savvy in showing your personality in your writing, sometimes it might sound dry and people don't know, at least for me, that's where I struggle sometimes when I'm reading emails. I'm like, well, this sounds really intense. But then when you talk to someone, you're like, oh, okay, it's not that intense. It's just, they're trying to sound a certain way. So that's something you want to do. Yeah, so weekly, you just got to make sure if you're coming and you know how many classes you're taking for that quarter, and you know what your life, if you're working, and what that looked like, just really know how you're managing that time. If you can do a full 14 credits, I think you can do up to 8 credits to still be full-time. And just that's something you want to make a decision with your advisor when you meet with them, and just to ensure, and always stay in communication with your professors. They're very much invested in your education, and I think at the master's level, I think they know you're committed to doing this, because you really don't have to choose to do this if you don't want to. So that's why a lot of it is on you to stay connected with it. But I think if you're struggling, I think 2 people mentioned mental health things coming up and different things happening in your life. Just, I think, stay connected with them, let them know when you're struggling, if you can't do an assignment. And I think people are more, the professors are very open at Iliff. You'll see how connected you are very quickly with them, and you'll find professors that you'll enjoy working with. And I found a couple that I work with from the start to the end at Iliff. So yeah, so it's just for you to get into it and find that rhythm of what works for you. And one thing I recognize from my experience is that I can take the majority of classes in the fall and the winter and then go lighter in the spring. But that's something you'll have to experience to know what'll work for you. But yeah. Yeah,
and that reminds me, I maybe should add too, so that our residential only, right, on campus only classes, they only meet one day a week, right? For like a 3.5 hour block, Catherine, is that right? Yeah. And then the online courses almost are entirely asynchronous, right? So you're not like zooming into like a lecture, like in the professor's den or something like that. Some of the classes that are more internship based or IBPC might have a live Zoom that works for everybody, right, in the schedule, but usually it's asynchronous. So like you don't have to log on, like every day at 1 p.m. or something, right? Because as Catherine mentioned, most of our students kind of in their late 30s, early 40s, almost all of them are working full time, or they have, or they have families. So like the school recognizes, and I think all of our academic programs, whether they're in-seat, hybrid, online, are attentive to that need for flexibility, right, in your life. But as Dinesh pointed out, particularly probably with the online hybrid stuff, like you also do not want to wait until like Saturday at midnight to start to catch up with your discussions and those online classes, because you will fall behind. I mean, again, quarter system, 10 weeks, it can go by in a blaze, right? So like you do have to like, but that discipline will look different for every student, right? So for some of you might have, it's early morning, right, as your time to go ahead and catch up and do some stuff like almost every day, right? And for other folks, it could be a totally different time. So anyway, that great response to that question. Thanks,
if I could just add one thing to that, I absolutely want to affirm that like managing your time is important and that the quarter goes quickly. And as an example of what Dennis was saying about if you stay in touch with your faculty, they will work with you when needed. in late October of my last year at Iliff, I broke my leg hiking. And there were a couple weeks where I was on pain pills such that when I tried to read, I was like trying with one eye and then the other, and it was not working. So I could not keep up with my classwork. And that's pretty late in the fall quarter, late October. And so my professors worked with me and gave me extensions to finish my coursework after the end of the term, because otherwise I was going to have to drop all my classes. So even in a fairly extreme example, they really worked with me and made it easy. I don't even remember all the details because I was on those pain pills, but I still graduated on time. Luckily, I was not in my internship when that happened, but they were super accommodating and focused on what I needed rather than on rigidity around, well, this was the deadline and you couldn't do it. So I just want to reinforce that the faculty really are there not just to teach us, but to support us, and that they will go out of their way to do that if we ask for help.
As a faculty person, you didn't ask me to answer that question, but I do think there's a lot of, I guess we're very committed to academic freedom, right, for both students and faculty at Iliff. And so there are a lot of different teaching styles, right? So I think class to class, you get really different experiences in all kinds of ways. So there are people who lecture. I only lecture when pressed heavily to do so in my classes. So it just kind of depends. I think we do value interaction very highly, but it is, I think, in an online environment, it's an incredible act of imagination to conjure students, from their writing into real people. And so we've been working over the years to get better and better at that, and to find ways that are really embodied, even when everybody's at their computer in different states. So it's just been an interesting experiment in how community works. And I think one of the interesting things for me is I came when Iliff was a fully residential school and made the transition. And when we started with the Journey program and hybrid classes, we were just terrified that students wouldn't know each other, that they wouldn't feel connected. And it's turned out that those cohorts are more strongly connected sometimes than our residential students, because they've had to be really intentional about how they meet one another and how they connect over time. And so now I think the other thing is coming through. We're like, oh wait, we have to get our residential students together more, because they're all really busy and they just come in for classes and then they leave, and we don't, they don't have that kind of community. So it's been an interesting process of realizing like that all of our preconceived notions about how community works and who's going to be connected and not were wrong. And we've had to sort of re-envision all of that over the years. It's been an interesting process. But I will affirm, like, for graduate education, for every hour that you're in class, you're supposed to be working 3 hours out of class. That's the kind of ratio, which if you think about 14 credit hours, I can't do the math off the top of my head. It's more than a full-time job, right? So I don't think everybody gives it that much time, because otherwise they would be generating time in some sort of time machine out there. But I do think it's an important thing to consider, that your life is going to change in dramatic ways to try to do a full-time graduate degree, no matter else what is going on. People have been really creative, and they do manage it with multiple jobs and families and, caregiving responsibilities and all kinds of things. But I think that's a big change. And the other change is being identified as a religious professional. And I could hear that in Lou's words about like, what is this thing you're doing? And like, are you going to be a priest now? Or what? I thought you were Buddhist. What's happening? Just that kind of identity shift is both in being identified as a religious professional and as being a student again, which if you've been out of that world for a long time can feel sometimes a little infantilizing, or a little like, what, like, I was the teacher, Jackie, for all those years, and now suddenly I'm in the student role again. And so there is some adjusting, I think, identity wise, just coming into an MDiv. I mean, probably any graduate degree, but I think the sort of identification with a religious tradition or religious language or whatever theology is supposed to be in people's minds. Also, sometimes you have to work with your friend group to be like, no, still the same person. You can still, curse around me. It's going to be okay. It's just a weird, a transition for some people.
Well, thank you all for that. Anybody else have feel the spirit moving to respond to JP's question? Or any other questions? And if not, that is okay. I think time check, we're like at 11:40. So yeah, we made good time. I don't have any problems at all letting us out early before we were scheduled to go all the way till noon. I don't want to rush things either, but we also don't necessarily have to linger. This has been a rich conversation. So I really appreciate the questions and the responses from everyone.
Just say one other thing, which is a comparative thing, I think, across schools. And that is, there are a lot of communities that are more able to worship together as a whole community because there's more similarity in religious belief, or more able to speak the same language in a classroom in a familiar way and assume that everybody else will understand, you know, your insider kind of talk denominationally or otherwise. And so, I mean, I think for some people at Iliff, there's a loss in that it would be really nice to be able to come into a place where everybody can pray in the same language, or everybody can do communion in the same way, or whatever it is. I think the strength of that is for religious leaders who are working in a world that is one, declining in religiosity and affiliation in all kinds of ways, and two, you know, remarkably diverse in commitment in the world. Our students get to practice that in the classroom, right? So they practice being a committed person with deep roots in a tradition that matters to them in some cases, or to values that really matter to them and are very significant. Identity shaping, I've given my life to these values, but to do so into a space that's really mixed, and developing the capacity to be able to speak with conviction and to speak grounded in your own self, but to do so in a community that's really not necessarily going to share those commitments. So, you know, there's some loss, I think, in like cohesiveness and belonging sometimes, that, you know, we can't all do the same thing at the same time in the same way, but there's a real gain in terms of being able to function in a diverse kind of religious world that I think, particularly those working in therapy or chaplaincy, or I mean, all kinds of spaces, but even I think people who are going to be ordained in particular traditions, you know, the people that you're reaching out to aren't insiders to that often, right? And so learning how to speak into those kind of diverse spaces, public spaces, multiply committed spaces, and to, you know, not only just respect those, but to have some sense of understanding them and know how to communicate across those kind of differences is something that, you know, we practice in every discussion forum on Canvas. You know, it's kind of part of that implicit curriculum that's not really named, but I think our grads do better in the world. Sometimes places, and there are other reasons that other schools are really great, but if you've gone to a school where, you know, 80% of the MDiv student body is going to be an ordained Episcopal priest, and they walk with the liturgy in front of them in all kinds of ways, right? Sometimes they can get released out to the wild and be like, wait, you don't understand, you know, what this is, or, you know, they don't have that practice of speaking across diversities, across lines. And so anyway, there are trade-offs, right? And there are different things that people need at different times, but I think that's one of the sort of gifts of the Iliff community, and it's been a gift to me as an instructor, right? I came out of the Bible Belt in the US, and so, you know, when you sit in your first class and there's this Mormon military chaplain sitting next to a UU Afro-Caribbean lesbian woman, and we're all three going to be learning practical theology, which doesn't actually sometimes recognize that those two people would exist.
Right,
you know,
right.
we all learn too, and so that it's been a really fruitful and stretching and wonderful environment for me as a faculty person too.
That's wow. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, Dr. Moore, that's important. Yeah, I do get students sometimes, particularly at more mainstream moderate United Methodist students, ask me about chapel at Iliff. I mean, and back in my day, right, we did, you know, we'd have I don't know, weekly, bi-weekly chapel, and it was kind of, you know, sort of general mainline progressive Protestant, basically. And then we had a significant amount of like on-campus Anglican studies only students. So they actually had their own chapel as well. And so I hung out with them. I went to their chapel more just because I dug the liturgy more. That's probably why I'm Episcopalian now. Should have known back then. But we do still have chapels, and particularly during gathering days, we'll kind of have sort of nationally known cool preachers coming in, right? Lately, often it's been from the African-American sort of prophetic tradition. But we also had Gene Robinson, right? Former bishop, right? At the Episcopal Church come and talk. So we do have those events, but they're not weekly. Like some seminaries require you to go to chapel, right? And you have to go every week and you can't miss it. And that is not Iliff. And the last thing, though, I'll say about that is Reverend Dr. Kathy Kelsey, who's on our faculty and teaches many of the required United Methodist courses, is also sort of our dean of spiritual life of our community. So she does try kind of attend to that. But as you might imagine, given our whole conversation today about the diversity of our student body, that makes it challenging, right? To sort of present, here's the one thing, right? That's going to encompass sort of everybody's actual authentic lived spiritual life. But she does a really good job with that, I think. And she's very helpful in including our through Zoom, our journey and online students as well into those spaces. So like when the massacre happened at the Pulse nightclub, right, in Orlando, she held sort of an impromptu get together ritual for the whole Iliff body there and allowed people usually to speak from their own tradition, right, into their own heart and their own hope. And so that's kind of how we have navigated that at Iliff. But I think Dr. Turpin's totally right. I mean, I think, you got to go to a school that's going to really give you what you need. And for some students, if their most important thing is like common worship in just this one way every week, you're not going to get that at Iliff, right? Hopefully those kind of students have their own community already, right, though, that you're in, and then that can be super fruitful, right, to be moving from the Iliff theology space into that. But yeah, that's thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think that's true, and we want to be authentic with everybody. So. All right, 11:47. Any last call. Any other questions or concerns? And I know Dr. Turpin and I don't think are going anywhere, so you can feel free to reach out to us. Yes, Jackie, it looks like you.
I was just going to say thank you, and JP, thank you for a lot of the questions today. So I was listening in definitely, and thank you for your time, and particularly for the students who join us today.
Yes. Yay.
Yeah, it's been very, very informative. I'm always somewhat skeptical of like Zoom, gatherings for some reason, and how fruitful they're actually going to be in the mission events. And I'm surprised at how clarifying, revealing it is. And yeah, hearing the student voices has been wonderful. And you and Catherine, I'm saying you because I'm staring at you right now, Daniel. But yeah, you two have been just great, and really offering a very comprehensive, holistic view of what it might be like to be a student there. So yeah.
Oh, great, thanks. We love to hear that. Yeah, and that's intentional too. We were doing a lot of Iliff, admissions open houses, right, via Zoom when the pandemic happened, and we got students who were looking at other schools too, and it was always lovely to hear that. And that was their feedback too. Is that I guess apparently some schools were doing a little bait and switch stuff where like you would come, but then like in order to learn about financial aid, you had to like turn up to another event. And so they were like, thank you, Iliff, for not doing that and actually having like real live human beings and not just like recorded stuff the entire time. And so I appreciate that. Thank you, JP, for sharing that, and Jackie, appreciate it. Well, good. And yes, and thank you to our students. Thank you, Dr. Turpin, for your time. Yeah, this was rich. This was really great for me too, to hear kind of your stories and to rehear, or in some cases learn for the first time, some of our alums, what your experience was like. So thank you all. And I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. And prospective folks, you have any questions, you know how to reach out to me. Okay. All right. Blessings. Peace.
Thanks, you all.